All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Simulating and Advocating for Child Allowances. My name is Justin Williams. I'll be moderating this event today. I'm the Development Director with Humanity Forward. We have a wonderful panel that's going to be presenting some of the work that they're going with. We're going to be opening it up to audience questions. Got some questions of my own if we want to have some time towards the end. But just to do a quick run of show, I know a lot of you have probably been in these today and have heard it over and over again. If you do have a question, there is a ask a question button at the bottom. Please put all questions in there. There's also a chat for anybody that wants to post links, have conversation about what's kind of happening going through. But just know any questions, please put in the ask the question. That's the only place that we're going to be able to see that and be able to make sure it goes in there. Also within ask a question, I'm sure you know again, you're able to vote in there. So if there is a couple questions that people are really looking for, please upvote that. You can do it Reddit style so that gets at the top of the list. To make sure that those kind of go through and get asked. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of pass it around for everyone to kind of do their own introductions. I think I'm going to do it starting from left to right on my screen. So Yash, please take it away. Introduce yourself and tell us what you're working on.
Of course. My name is Yash Vijay. I am a high schooler in Illinois, in the greater Chicago area. I've been working alongside Max on the PolicyEngine project. And our presentation today is going to be an analysis of the End Child Poverty Act bill. And yeah, that's what we're here for.
Awesome. Thank you, Yash. I think we'll keep it in the same ecosystem and pass it on over to Max.
Yeah, good to see you all. My name is Max. I'm the co-founder and CEO of PolicyEngine. We build software that computes the impact of public policy. And we're going to show, as Yash said, an example of using PolicyEngine to analyze this child allowance bill from Rep. Tlaib.
Great. Thank you, Max. Welcome both. And then finally, pass it over on to Nate.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Nate. I am a teacher in Baltimore City Schools. That's my full-time job. But I've also have a lot of work with simulating child benefit policies. I worked with Max at the UBI Center. And most recently, I started the Maryland Child Alliance. Where we advocate for a state-level child benefit across the state. And so today I'll be sharing a little bit about our work and our simulation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nate. Okay, so what we're going to do is both teams have presentations. So we're actually going to start over with Max and Yash. They're going to present first. Any questions that you have during it, please put in and ask a question. We're going to have a good amount of time at the end to if we need to go back, about any things that you're kind of learning about or hearing about. But without further ado, pass it over to Yash to share a screen and get this guy going.
Yeah. Max, if you could share your screen of the presentation.
Sure. Yeah. Oops. Yeah, great. So as I mentioned, can you all, seems like you should be able to see my screen.
Yep, we can see it.
We're going to share an analysis of the End Child Poverty Act. And we're doing all of this using the PolicyEngine software, which will also demonstrate using this as a case study to really estimate the budgetary impact, poverty impact, all that kind of stuff with a flexible interface that lets you explore other policies as well. So I'll turn it over to Yash to give some background on the policy, and then I'll give the demo later on. Yash.
Yeah. So as Max said, I'm going to start off with the what and the why of the End Child Poverty Act, the motivation for creating the bill, the current status of child welfare in the United States, and then later on, Max will go into the PolicyEngine application and show you all an example of how we're able to implement both actual legislation and bills into our application for further analysis. So starting off, I'm going to be talking about the existing tax credit welfare programs that the End Child Poverty Act seeks to replace. So the two programs that I'm going to be focusing on, because these are the programs that the ECPA wants to take away, is the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit. And these have been some of the largest welfare programs in the United States, but they do have a few problems. The first one is that the policies, as you can see in the graph showing income versus benefit for both these programs, they do phase in, which means that people that are in extreme poverty and earn, for example, in the EITC less than $7,000, and for the child tax credit, maybe less than $7,000 as well, they won't receive full benefits, and they may not receive what they need to live and prosper. And then the second part is that these programs are administered through tax systems. So if people don't file their taxes correctly or aren't filing their taxes in a sufficient manner, they may not be able to receive their full benefit, which is another major concern when it comes to these two programs. So yeah, the EITC and the CTC, they do exclude especially children when it comes to their benefits. From what the poorest 9% of kids in the nation, and they also particularly exclude the next poorest 13% from very necessary welfare. Next slide, please. All right, so then in response to these issues, Representatives Rashida Tlaib and Representative Mondaire Jones, they decided to create the End Child Poverty Act bill, which was released in February 2022. And a major part of it was Matt Bruenig, who ran the analysis and helped design it. And one of the quotations that I really like from him is that no family would ever find themselves below the official poverty line solely because they have children, which has been a major concern with these programs regarding families in extreme poverty. So this is the reason and the rationale behind this bill. So now I want to move on to describing the End Child Poverty Act, which is split into four major parts. The first part is a universal child benefit, where each eligible child receives $393 per month, and this is the actual amount is fixed as the difference between the 1 and 2 person federal poverty lines. So this is going to be a very current benefit program for years to come. The second part is an adult dependent credit, and each eligible dependent adult receives $600 per year. The third part is a tax filer credit, and this seeks to replace some of the slightly more confusing parts of the EITC, where joint filers receive $1,200 per year, and single and other filers, this is the part that has been slightly confusing in the EITC, these filers receive $600 per year. There is a phase-out rate at 5% of the income above for joint filers for $40,000 total income, and for other filers, including single filers, $20,000. And finally, this ECPA replaces the Earned Income Tax Credit, EITC, and the Child Tax Credit, CTC. So now I do want to move on to a situation that we created using PolicyEngine. Max will go on in more detail about this in his segment of the presentation, but I do want to take a look at that the difference between the current system with the EITC and Child Tax Credit and the End Child Poverty Act, which consists of these three different credits: the child allowance, which is $9,432 for this hypothetical example, an earner credit, which is $100 because this earner is earning above the $20,000 phase out limit. So therefore, the benefit that they receive phases out at 5%, and an adult dependent credit because in this hypothetical situation, there is a grandparent who would be considered as an eligible dependent adult. And the difference between the baseline and reform for this hypothetical family is $1,547, which is a significant amount in many people's lives. And this bill does have the possibility to change a lot of lives in these United States. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Yash. So I'm going to move on and demonstrate some of the capabilities of the PolicyEngine app using this tool or this policy as an example. So the first thing I want to show is just if you go to policyengine.org, you can see a couple big buttons. In this case, we care about the US. We're also live in the UK. And by default, it takes you to a screen. We'll actually return to this in a minute, where you can enter information about your household, and it'll calculate your taxes and benefits today, as well as what they would look like if you change the public policy. And that's what we did here. So in the policy tab, you can go in. By default, it shows you some income tax thresholds. You can change all of those, and it's organized by government department. So in this case, the CTC and the CTC, those are both part of the Internal Revenue Service. So we can actually go in here, we can abolish the CTC, we can also abolish the EITC. And then the remainder of the policy parameters are actually in third party, since it's not part of the bill yet. So if you want to explore with the UBI policies, you can go into the UBI Center section, basic income, and now we've got all these UBI parameters. And also the End Child Poverty Act is our second contributed section. So you've got all the parameters that Yash just described in terms of adult dependent credit and the filer credit. So there's quite a bit of parameters that would be required to actually define this policy. So I sort of preloaded it here. And once you do define it, you can go into this US impact page, and that's where it will calculate the budgetary impact, poverty, etc. So that's what this looks like for the ECPA. It's a somewhat costly reform. It does cost $240 billion, but it would cut poverty pretty dramatically by 28% and leave 71% of people better off. It's actually designed specifically to avoid leaving people worse off. So 0% come out behind. Of course, once you fund it with taxes, that would potentially change. So here's just a breakdown of the budget. A lot of the revenues actually increase because we're repealing these tax credits, but that's more than offset by the benefit outlays, and the net impact is that $240 billion. From there, you scroll down and you can see the poverty impact by age group. So 28%, that's what we saw at the top line. But child poverty is, of course, geared towards kids. So child poverty falls even more, from 10% to 4.5%. So that's a 55% delta. And something that's even more pronounced, and I think really speaks to the power of child allowances, because they don't go through the IRS. They could go through the Social Security Administration and therefore really reach the deepest poor children. So this basically eradicates deep child poverty. So children would no longer live below half the poverty line. And overall deep poverty would also fall over 40%. Here's another view into the distributional consequences. So the bottom decile would actually see their net income rise 18%. So that's income after taxes and benefits. And that's significantly more than, for example, the top decile actually does gain as well, but only by 0.6%. And so those are the averages within deciles. We can also look within a decile to see which people come out ahead and behind. In this case, nobody comes out behind, but you can see that actually 3/4 of people in the bottom income decile would see their income rise more than 5%. And another 13% see it rise less than 5%. So about 90% of people in that bottom decile come out ahead. And that share declines as you go into the higher income deciles, and in particular, the share who really benefit a substantial amount. The last chart we show here is the income inequality impact. So there are a few different ways you can measure the inequality of income. The most broad is called the Gini index. So this really is a comprehensive measure. It looks at the entire income distribution. And in this case, this reform would actually lower that by 3.6%. Some other kind of simpler ways to measure it are just what share of the total income, so income after taxes and benefits, is held by the top 10% and top 1%. And for example, today, the top 10% hold 30.4% of the income. This policy would reduce that to 29%. So roughly a 2 to 3% change in income inequality, depending on how you measure it. And the last thing I'm going to show now is returning to that sample household Yash showed. We can actually customize it to anyone. And actually, maybe Yash, if you can drop the link in the chat, welcome you all to try it out. So we can go single here, and we can specify, again, those 2 children and 1 adult dependents. And now we'll go into income. We said 30,000 income, so we can go there. No one else has income here. And now we have to specify the demographics. So dependents are by default 10-year-old children, which is fine. But this third dependent is going to be a senior. So we'll put them at 71, which should work. And now it's going to actually calculate in real time, based on what you've specified, your current taxes and benefits for this household, as well as the taxes and benefits for the reform scenario. And we'll be able to see those differences. So as Yash showed, this household would gain about $1,500 per year, and market income doesn't change. Their benefits would go up, mostly due to the basic income, entirely actually. And then their taxes, you would see some credits fall, some credits rise. And for example, that ECPA is down here, and you can see that those numbers go up. In the interest of time, I'll show you the last chart as well. So this is kind of a wonkier one. Let's say this household is interested to know, this is my structure in terms of the number of people in the household, their ages and all that. But what happens if I vary how much I earn? So we calculate that as well. On the x-axis here is your employment income, and on the y is how much you have after taxes and benefits again. So in the current state, it pretty much rises. There's a bit of a cliff here. I think that's due to SNAP. And if we add the reform, we see that in the reform scenario, it's at least as high up. And we can actually plot the differences there too. So this shows us that this policy is really effective at increasing the incomes of the very lowest earning households. And the impact actually starts to fall after you earn more income, and then it stabilizes around $5,500. We can also look at the marginal tax rates. So because we're removing those phase-ins, it's actually going to increase the marginal tax rate at the bottom, and then it's going to reduce marginal tax rates for sort of more low middle income households. So this is a measure of the work incentives. All right, so that is the demo. I just wanted to close also by talking about some of our future steps in this area. And the most important one is modeling the state tax and benefit systems. This is what we're starting to do now. So we have the federal programs, a lot of federal tax programs, a lot of federal benefit programs, a lot of benefit programs across all states, or most of them. But state taxes can actually influence this quite a bit. For example, there are a number of states that match the federal EITC and CTC. So those matching programs would be affected by these federal reforms as well. And macroeconomic effects would be another one. So we showed those marginal tax rates, the change to income, all of that is going to affect your expected labor supply based on the empirical literature. And finally, we're going to improve the accuracy of the data. So right now we're using all those macro estimates in terms of cost and poverty and inequality. That's based on the current population survey, which is known pretty well to underreport income, especially at the top end, and also benefit receipt. So we have some methods we've deployed in the UK, which we're going to bring over to the US to enhance that survey data and make the estimates more accurate. But what I really want to leave you with is that we hope to make this tool as flexible to all kinds of policies, but child allowances, I think, Nate will talk about the importance of these policies. Really, there's so much room to experiment with them. And we hope that our tool, PolicyEngine, can help you and anyone else, think tanks, campaigns, ultimately government, explore those kind of policies, see what the impact is, and let's let the best policy win. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Yash and Max. And I'm actually going to jump protocol here a little bit because we just had a question from Faye on the calculator. What is the best way to use this calculator for me as a UBI advocate?
Yeah, well, so there is that UBI section. If you go into the policy tab of policyengine.org/US. So really you can try out different UBI policies. I think one of the things that is often not understood by the broad public is just how effective even relatively small UBIs can be, even maybe age-targeted UBIs at reducing poverty and also inequality, even if you fund them. So we can actually fund these policies with a variety of tax reforms. I'd encourage you to just try a bunch of them. We've played around with a whole bunch of tax reforms to create budget-neutral UBI policies. Pretty much any way you fund a UBI, it's going to be progressive, just because there really are not tax policies that cause low-income people to pay more in dollars than high-income people.
Awesome. Thank you, Max, and thank you, Faye, for your question. So now let's pass it over to Nate to kind of go over through. Nate, I believe you don't have a presentation, but you do have some.
Yeah, I was going to share our website a little bit. I think talking a little bit more about my organization, the Maryland Child Alliance, might be helpful. I'll start by sharing my screen. So the Maryland Child Alliance, we are a organization fighting for a state level child benefit. Max they were going over federal child allowance, child benefit. We use those interchangeably. And the reason for our organization is that momentum for a child allowance or even expanding the CTC has kind of halted, though there's been some proposals from some Republican legislators recently that might pick the momentum back up at the federal level. But those are all done through the tax system, or they have a phase in that will continue to miss kids at the bottom. I am a teacher in Baltimore City. I teach in a Title I school, and I recognize that a lot of these programs that are child tax credits and allowances that are being proposed at the federal level will still miss my students because they're not truly universal. And so in Maryland, we have a trifecta, or we have a supermajority of Democrats in both houses, and probably a Democrat governor coming in. And there's some momentum to think big about what we can do to lift kids out of poverty. And we're really trying to push that momentum towards a universal benefit. We did a study recently that found that about 8% of kids in Maryland live in homes that don't file income taxes. So any benefit done through the tax system, whether it's EITC matching, which Maryland does, a state level CTC, will miss those 8% of kids. And about 3/4 of kids living in deep poverty live in households that don't file income taxes. So the ceiling on a child tax credit boosting kids out of deep poverty is about 25%. So we're really pushing to make this a universal benefit to lift as many kids out of poverty as we can. It's personal to me, but it's also just important, for the state of Maryland to invest in our kids. And so I used to work with Max at the UBI Center, so I have some experience in creating simulations to model different child benefit programs. So I wanted to take those skills I built at the UBI Center and turn them into advocacy. And that's what the Maryland Child Alliance is. One of the first things we released was this dashboard, which I think and gives us a big advantage when we meet with state legislators and policymakers in terms of advocating for our policy. So I'm going to run you through it a little bit right now. There are only 3 inputs to this dashboard. You can select the eligible age group, so you can either select all children or young children. There's some reason to target young children if you have limited funds, because the earlier you lift a kid out of poverty, the greater return on investment you get. So the default here is all children. You can select a $100 monthly or a $200 monthly benefit. And you can look you can break it down by county or state district. I'm going to do, so you can see a $200 monthly benefit would lift almost 56,000 kids out of poverty in Maryland, cut child poverty by more than a third. We're going to look at a $100 monthly benefit for a second. You can see it updates. But this is where I think we really have the power. And as I've met with state legislators, being able to show them, hey, let's zoom in on your district. How does this policy impact your district, your constituents? This map here is a map of Maryland state districts. So you can see I live here in District 46, so $100 in my district. Child poverty is almost half of kids live in poverty. It would cut child poverty by 9%, $100 monthly child allowance. It cuts deep child poverty by a lot more. So if you want to take a deeper look, we have all the districts here. So we could jump to 46 where I live, And we can look deeper into the data. So what's the impact on deep poverty in District 46? We'd cut it by more than a quarter, about 27%, with $100 a month per kid. We can, you can target younger children. You can target counties, and this county gives us the ability to do some local activism to, a place like Baltimore where a third of kids live in poverty. Baltimore has an income tax of its own and some funds that it could possibly spend on a young child allowance. So this county level gives us the ability to advocate at the local level, and the state district gives us the ability to advocate at the state level. So we've already had a lot of meetings with state legislators, and we're really hoping to get some momentum going for truly universal child benefits at the state level. There are 10 states currently that have child tax credits, and Alaska probably has the only thing that we could consider a truly universal child benefit. I'm going to stop sharing with the permanent fund dividend. And we want Maryland to be truly a leader and lift kids out of poverty in our state, but also hopefully create momentum in other states to copy this, especially if we lose momentum at the federal level. So that's a little bit about us. Happy to take any questions. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Nate, honestly, powerful tool. I mean, being able to go to like literally someone and show them what, from a constituency standpoint, what they're affecting. I mean, it's literally the most powerful tool you could have,
One more, thank you. And one more thing I want to add, we're hoping to, we're actually working on partnering with PolicyEngine right now to kind of replicate the End Child Poverty Act at the state level. Maryland has a lot of redundant tax credits that miss the poorest families. What if we phase out those credits and replace them with a universal benefit? So that'll be an update to our simulations eventually. And I'm really excited to be working with PolicyEngine on that.
Yeah, I mean, exciting stuff. I mean, from both sides, right? I think if you can start to get these implemented, both tools like throughout the country, I mean, every time that you can very easily, succinctly just say like, let's just plug in the numbers and see what this actually does for your constituents. I mean, it's mind blowing, right? Like you're not sitting there having to throw about a bunch of policy papers and say, well, this is what it would do for the country. That like, whether it's a state rep, whether it's state legislative, whether it is a House member, it's like their district, their constituents, right? Like those are the numbers that they, really always want to see, because that's, the biggest impact that they can have, right? That they can actually, talk about. So both sides, like just amazing work and love to see it. One question I do have is, looking at child allowances and looking at, things like guaranteed income, basic income, like how do you think child allowances actually kind of folds into that conversation of like basic income?
You go.
All right, I can take this one. I mean, a child allowance or a child benefit, it is a guaranteed income for families with children. So it gets people used to universal checks. And it is a basic income that is exclusive for families. But, a UBI would likely be, there need to be some changes in revenue. But if we target children, that's where we get our highest return on investment. There was a study recently that used the expanded CTC that said for every $1,000 we spend on cash benefits for kids, we get $5,600 in return. So that's a 5.6 ROI. Investing in our kids, invest in our future, and it pays for itself in the long run. It doesn't pay for itself in the short run, but it does pay for itself in the long run.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that, I think it's a really nice way to have an incremental step toward UBI, where guaranteed income, if it phases out with income, that creates a whole bunch of the welfare traps that we see in the existing system. Not to say, I think there's huge value in what guaranteed income is doing on the sort of the left end of the chart in terms of making sure people who don't have earnings today still have a floor. That's imperative for cutting poverty, and especially deep poverty. But if we want to have a sustainable system, right now, even people face marginal tax rates of above 50%. If you have a disabled child, or if you're disabled yourself, it can easily be close to 100%. You basically are totally discouraged from working. So we're really going for universality to fix those kinds of problems. Starting with age is kind of the most natural way to cut the cost. You can have a child allowance that's either a small amount or just for young kids. Sort of the most extreme version of this would just be a one-time baby bonus. We were all born at some point, so it's sort of a universal program. And then over time, we can start to expand it, but we're not starting from this means testing premise. We're starting from a universal premise that becomes more inclusive.
Great. And then got a question from Marina here. Does the group have any suggestions for a mechanism to provide a child basic income in states without state income tax?
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason it would be harder. I think it's hard if you have a child tax credit, but Nate, you've probably looked into this more. If it's a child benefit that is not intended to go through the tax system, that is not an obstacle.
Yeah, I'll drop a link to a paper we wrote about this recently, so you can find about, depending on the state, 90 to 94% of kids through the tax code. But the ones you don't find through the tax code are often the ones living in the poorest families. So it's really important that you find those kids. It's not easy, but I think by creating a child registry at the state level, it is possible. One, you can partner with public schools. Parents already need to prove that they are the legal guardian and are a resident of the state to enroll their kid in school. So that finds school-age children. So now the target you need to find are non-school-age children who live in houses that do not file taxes. There's some creative ways to find them. One, auto-enroll kids at birth so that you're building up that system. So the system kind of solves itself after 4 years because now kids are either auto-enrolled at birth or they're in the school system. You can partner with pediatrician offices, partner with pre-Ks, especially Head Start, where kids are more likely to be in families that don't file income taxes. And of course, just an awareness campaign to spread the word that, hey, parents, enroll and there's money for you. So it's not as easy at the federal level because you don't have access to the Social Security Administration data, but it is possible.
Great, thank you all. And with like current child assistance programs, right? I guess the question would be like, which ones are currently working? And then for those ones that are working or maybe not working, right? Like, how do they compare against like the child allowance? Like, what makes the child allowance such a better program?
Yeah, Yash, do you want to speak to this on the EITC and CTC?
Sure, I can talk about a program that
and Tanf too, actually. Yeah,
that's exactly what I want to get into, because in my work at PolicyEngine, one of the federal programs that I was focusing on modeling was Tanf, the large behemoth that works completely differently in different states. It has a lot of eligibility requirements. Not many people are knowledgeable about the benefits that they can get from Tanf because there's not enough online tools that help people determine whether they could be eligible or not. There's just a lot of roadblocks when it comes to a person trying to get benefits from Tanf. And comparing this to this new proposal with the ECPA of a universal child allowance, especially at birth, because this will be done by the Social Security Administration if passed into law. This is just so much easier for people to actually get their benefits, for families to get benefits, compared to the Tanf system where you have to jump through a lot of hurdles to even be able to see getting any benefits. And another point is just that it's just a large, slightly outdated system that I just see a child allowance being able to reach more people, have more impact, and just being a better program overall.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, Yash has done a lot of work in this space. My team of professional policy analysts, we spend hours and hours trying to understand how these programs work so that we can compute them and put them into our model. And that is not a luxury that people who are actually enrolled or trying to participate in the system have. And that has a few consequences. One is, I think when there's something that's opaque, all sides can use that to whatever kind of messaging advantage they have. So you have conservatives who say, oh, this is really generous. We already have a great welfare system. Who's going to rebut that? Because you don't have the system and the tools to actually do so. And then people who are trying to participate, they might just get overwhelmed and like skip out on the system. And you see this in the data. 1 in 5 people who qualify for the earned income tax credit don't claim it. Nate just shared a whole bunch of stats showing how poorly the CTC does for low-income people, and the complexity of those systems really factors into that. So I think there's just a lot of tangible, quantifiable benefits of having a very legible system compared to what we have today.
Yeah, particularly around welfare programs, right? I think a lot of us know, the loopholes, that a lot of people need to jump through, for those, getting, rolled into those kinds of things. And also just the public perception, right? I mean, I think a lot of people, what you always hear so many things about, the means testing aspect, right? Of like all these kind of like basic income pilots that are happening, and why so many people push for the universality of it, right? Where it's like, this can't be something looked down upon, right? And unfortunately, in a lot of ways, particularly in the States, that's where, welfare has gone, right? Like, people need it, but it's very difficult to get. There's a lot of loopholes. You have to continually do it, but then you're also looked down upon, right? Because you are struggling, because you are a single mom, that's trying to, just do the thing, right? 2 kids, you're trying to pay the bills and raise your kids at the same time. So, getting more of these universal programs, right, that come in, that it's a right, that you have, that, when you have kids, to help support and, help raise our children and keep them out of poverty. It's a generational thing, unfortunately, right? Where, you grow up in poverty, you don't see those other opportunities, right? You're kind of living in the same scenario with all these other kids of like, maybe it's a single parent, maybe you probably never see your parents, right? Because they're working 2 jobs. That gets ingrained into you, right? Like, oh, this is where I get. Like, you're not thinking of college or lawyer or doctor or whatever you would like to do, right? In that aspect. And it's something like quite legitimately, we talked about it earlier. It's like the earlier age that you can do this to get them out of it, the better options they have growing up, and even just mentally, where their headspace is, which I think is fantastic. So we got about 10 minutes left. I don't see any other questions coming in. Anyone that has any questions, please post them in there. Otherwise, if there's any closing remarks from the group, I'd love to go around from each one of you, and what are things that we can do, as a group here that can help you out. Again, I'm blown away by the tools that you both have built, because literally could utilize it on a daily basis, which I love things I can utilize. But yeah, would love to pass it around. Maybe start with Nate if you got any closing remarks, and anything that we can do on our end, to kind of help push this along.
Yeah, thanks. So, this is something we're working on in Maryland. We've built the infrastructure to expand into other states. If people are interested, the simulation that we did there just requires changing the state code in the code, and we can do it for other states. So if you're interested, please reach out. I put my email in the chat. And like, now is the time to be advocating for state level child allowances. There's some momentum from ARPA, the expanded child tax credit, where families were getting monthly checks per kid. There's momentum from that. And a lot of states have surplus money from a variety of from ARPA. So like in Maryland, we have an additional $7 billion. What is it in California, Max? Like 44?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah. So in Maryland, we could fund a young child allowance for 17 years for $100 with just the COVID extra money. States have the funds right now, and it's important that we make sure it gets to kids. Kids are an investment in our future. It's one of the smartest ways we can use our money is just giving parents money. And the last point I wanted to make was about means testing. If you get into this work and you start meeting with state legislators, that's the first thing they're going to want to do. And so being able to explain, one, the economics of why means testing is bad, but also like politically, when a child benefit is universal, it recognizes parenting as labor. And it is. I don't have kids, but I work with them every day, and it's tough. And so the second you means test that, you are no longer recognizing parenting as the labor it is. So now is the time to really advocate for a state level child benefit. If you need help, I've got experience in this work, and I would be happy to help.
Awesome. Thanks, Nate. Max or Yash, any closing remarks?
I would just echo what Nate said. I mean, I find his work extremely inspirational, and I think there's a huge opportunity to scale it across states, even your local area. This is the kind of policy that if you don't feel up to doing a full state advocacy organization, especially big states like California, where I'm based, I'm sure they would be happy to help with that. And also, it's a major ambition for us to get into these local policies. It would be pretty straightforward for us to add, for example, state level breakdowns. And we are working on sort of a map of how different policies affect local areas like that. And yeah, I would love to get the input of the UBI community. PolicyEngine was actually born out of the UBI community. So the UBI Center is a think tank I founded, and Nate was like the first researcher at. And the biggest question always is how you pay for it. How's it going to affect people? These kind of huge, ambitious policy reforms, I think people are very understandably skeptical if they don't know what's going to happen, what it's going to mean to them and their family. And we recognize that you had to actually build the software, build the tool, understand how policies work today in order to tell that story. So UBI, PolicyEngine is we're trying to be bigger than UBI now. You can do any kind of tax benefit reform, but it's got a major place in our heart, and would love your feedback. And if you think there are policies that would be interesting to model with it, I'd love to get in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And Josh, I don't know if you had any final remarks you wanted to make. Sorry, I didn't notice you unmuted there.
Max and Nate, they've given extremely great closing remarks. I guess since I mostly have experience with developing the back end of the PolicyEngine tool, I will talk about that. The main thing that we want this tool to be able to do is give people an understanding of what if we do this, like what if we try to abolish this program, what if we try to create a UBI, what if, right? And a lot of the discussion that I've seen in the current political climate is people talking about implementing or abolishing certain policies, but they don't take a look into, well, what will happen in terms of the economy, in terms of people's lives. And that is where PolicyEngine really exceeds in its open source infrastructure. It's completely open. You can take a look at our GitHub. We're a completely open organization in comparison to many of the closed source models that are currently used to try and simulate policies. And just get the word out. Just try it. Maybe just mess around with the tool. I think multiple people have put the link to the tool in chat, and have fun.
All right, awesome. Thank you all. Really appreciate this. I think it's these incremental movements we make, right? Where it's always the long game we're playing with this stuff. Excuse me. As we do this, if we're able to get stuff like this for children and parents to help them grow, it levels up from there, right? It starts looking at home care if you're dealing, with an elderly parent that you're taking care of, if you have, a dependent adult children, right? In that sense that you're still constantly taking. We always need to keep leveling it up until hopefully someday we do get into this more, universal, if you will, kind of like access to this stuff. But really want to thank the panel again. Really appreciate this. Appreciate all the people in the audience. Just for some final house cleaning, one event left, top of the hour, 4:00 Pacific. We have our final plenary. It is Rethinking Basic Income, Challenges to Universality and Uniformity of Payment. That is going to be the final event of this wonderful 3 days. There'll be some closing remarks also at 5:15 Pacific time. And then also at 5:15, we will have a Kumo Space event where everyone can just kind of get together, say hello, say goodbye, whatever you'd like to do, make those connections. Again, thank you, everyone. This is where glorious applause happens if we were live. But unfortunately, we are virtual, so we will have virtual applause. But really appreciate it. Thanks for everything. Hope you all have a great rest of your weekend. And thanks so much, y'all.